Hello. Denise Matto here. And it's time for this old boomer to school a slightly younger, almost boomer, kind of a semi boomer, namely Paul Vanderklay, to school him on how search engines work or how they used to work. I mean, right now, search engines are kind of being taken over by large language models, which is a new thing compared to the early days. I was actually writing code, Mr. Vanderklay, in the early days. I wasn't writing the fancy code that programmers do, but it was pre WYSIWYG. Okay, and it was the WYSIWYGs that killed my plans for a career as a web designer because I'm an Aspie. And one of the things about how my mind works is I actually see everything in reverse. And I discovered this on an art job very young. I mean, in my 20s. Um, and I was assigned to do this brochure, which included a map to a school. And I did the map perfectly in reverse. And this was an area where I lived. So I drove that route every day. So the headmaster of the school, going over the material, says to me, "Well, that's not a right turn, that's a left turn." And I said, "What are you talking about? I drive every day." What happens when you see things in reverse from birth, your brain totally compensates. But then when I put it into visual form, my brain is putting it into form in the way that it is, or that it thinks it is. Anyway, that's a little bit off track from what I started to say. But what I'm saying is it demonstrates that, yeah, I'm wired different. And one of the aspects of the wiring is that Windows 98 was still the thing when I was going through certification school to become a web designer, and I was writing HTML, then they came up with XHTML. I was getting started on that. I was dabbling in Perl, PERL. It's forum code. I was doing a lot. I was creating CGI forms, and I was beginning to learn JavaScript. Now, at that time, you needed somebody who could write code to design a website. WYSIWYGs are what you see is what you get. That's what people use now. You don't need to know what you're doing. You just go to the website. They say, okay, you drag and drop. I want a box here. I want a shopping cart there. And, you put it all together without writing code because it's all prepackaged. And because of my reversal thing, I couldn't work with it. But I could look at a page of printed code and the metadata that runs the search engines is up above the body of the thing. I used to do cascading style sheets, and I could see the website, but I couldn't really go forward with my plans because as soon as WYSIWYGs came out, people didn't need somebody like me, even though they would get a better website. You couldn't convince anybody of that, so there was no way to make a living. And then on top of it, I discovered that um, web internet activity was beginning to be a legal nightmare because the law was just beginning to start to think about regulating some of it. And I said, no, I'm going to have a lawyer on retainer if I run a web. And anyway. So that was way back at the turn of, the early 2000s, 2004 and 5 and in there. So Mr. Vanderklay is going on about how he thinks that how Google search engines work is they watch your eyeballs. And when you type in a search term, you know, potato salad recipes, whatever, it watches your eyeballs to decide what to serve up as the list. I don't know, you know, that's a little bit of the science fiction that comes out of a lot of the scare um, things about the internet is always watching us. Because yeah, Google and Facebook and these big companies, they do have algorithms that watch facial expression, but it's not for search engines. It's for, if you're, you know, if you're buying, if you're an ad developer, for example, let's say I'm going to do a whole campaign of ads for a potato salad company, okay? They want to notice if you put up 2 or 3 different thumbnails for their ad campaign, you want to see which one gets a hello, this is nice facial expression, or a, ooh, cringe, you know? Obviously, you're going to decide which one you want to go with based on that. That's not search engine. And I can tell you, because I was designing websites with the code to interact with the search engines, how they worked. Google kept a lot of its stuff, and still does, under wraps. The general public, including website designers, couldn't really know everything, because if you know exactly how the search algorithm was working, you could automatically set up websites to come up at the top. And this was before they had paid placement. Google was actually still a nonprofit or not-for-profit type of company when I was working with this stuff. It was just starting to bring in paid placement issues, and the AdSense campaigns and all were just starting to come in. So it was pure search engine at that point. And one of the things that we knew to enhance the possibility that your website would come up in a search was the um, the search engine, the algorithm that goes just it just goes like crawls the web, and it comes past it. It's like it just goes and catalogs everything, and it would notice if people are linking back to a site. Like, a lot of people link to Wikipedia, for example, because it's a popular starting point for most researchers. It will say, okay, we've got a lot of people linking back to this particular site. That's a solid search option to get, put that at the top of the list. There were other issues that we knew about web design. You had to have, you couldn't just put, you know, some poetic language that people would understand what you're talking about. The search engine needs very explicit language. It also, the algorithm notices if something is underlined or put in boldface or put as a title. It considers those to be more important terms, or in italics. Anything for emphasis, it will notice that word. So you had to find a few keywords to include in your material, find a way to emphasize them. And sometimes it made for a funny looking typeface, because you normally wouldn't suddenly have boldface or italics in a paragraph. But when you're trying to attract the attention of the search engine, you would put, like the potato salad thing, I would put, you know, if I wanted to make sure it was targeting a particular kind of potato, I would put that underline or boldface, russet potatoes or Yukon Gold potatoes. And also go to another website and put a link back to the one you're building. That was one of the strategies. The other strategy, which a lot of people didn't know about but was very good, was to understand that if you put the keyword in several times, it would attract the search engine. But if you put it in too many times, you would be classified as spam and you would be blocked out. So you had to kind of play guesswork, because Google wouldn't let people know what the exact numbers were, but in general, somewhere around 4 or 5 times for a lot of, depending on the solid block of typeface that you put in. And a lot of people didn't understand this. In fact, I started to really understand the ignorance of the South, the absolute. I mean, Bible Belt people are stupid. I'm sorry. Yes, you guys are proud of your ignorance. And it was another reason why I said, I can't deal with these people. I mean, I had several clients that I told them explicitly what was going on. And they're like, I'm just going to do whatever I want. And then blame you, Yankee. It's like, okay, I'm out of here. Anyway, so you had to know what you were putting in. And I had this, one of my clients was selling antiques. She had a whole antique store, bricks and mortar store. And she wasn't getting anywhere with eBay listings. And I said I knew how to do eBay listings, which rely on knowing how to use the search engine. Most people would do an eBay listing by put a nice picture and maybe a short, very brief description. And eBay would tell them put keywords here and there, and they would put the keywords that eBay would pick up. But they didn't know that if you did it right, not only eBay, but Google would pick up your listing. I knew that because I was spending money on courses to study that. I was getting certified. It was a $5,000 course that I was taking. And this lady had, there were 2 clients. One was the owner of the shop, and she referred somebody to me because she thought, oh, nobody can help this woman. I'll let that stupid idiot with her new web design business do this. She had a friend a lady who wanted to sell a beautiful doll and clothing collection. It was a 11-inch fashion doll of Jackie Onassis, Jackie Kennedy, and the full wardrobe of all of the famous outfits that Jackie Kennedy wore while she was in the White House as First Lady, a book about the designer. Oleg Cassini was her fashion designer. The whole thing, I mean, it was well worth over $1,000. And she said she wanted $1,000 for it, which meant we had to sell it for $1,200 for me to get my cut. And the antique store owner said, "Yeah, you're never gonna sell that, but that's what she wants, and it's not gonna happen." I said, "Well, we'll see." I knew to research the market and then put keywords that would attract the interested collectors. And one of the things I found out when I did the research was that France has a whole subculture of Jackie Kennedy collectors. And you could put eBay in the French side as well as the American side if you knew how to access it. So I did that. And I put the keywords in that would attract the right people and got the sale. It sold. And I faced the Southern ignorance of being accused of being up to something. I said, no, I tried to explain what I'd done, but I was talking to people who are proud of being illiterate. So don't even start to talk to them about code. So Paul Vanderklay thinks that Google watches eyeballs to come up with a certain. No. Google still uses a lot of the old search engine algorithm. I mean, I know they're also using a lot more large language model AI very rapidly, and the old method is probably on its last legs. But it was never reading eyeballs to decide what to show people. The eyeball reading is what marketers do to help advertisers and publishers decide what they're going to put out there in their actual listings or blogs or websites. It has nothing to do with the list of citations that come up in the search page. The citations that come up in the search page, back when Google was open source, not open source, but nonprofit, not for profit, and censorship had not really emerged on the internet because nobody really knew how to censor anybody at first. And there were some people who knew how to spam the search because they did clever things like using the keywords a certain way. And as I say, if Google caught on and said, okay, if you see this going on with the keywords, block that site for being a spammer. And so then responsible designers knew to avoid doing something like using a keyword too many times or using keywords that are clearly not relevant to the product, which wouldn't necessarily be picked up by the algorithm, but Google also would notice if it was getting reports or whatever. Somehow or other, they were able to watch that too. But again, it's not about eyeballs. It's about how the typeface, the text, is written. It's also about the links. And as time went on, now back then in Windows 98 days, nobody really had a lot of history with Google. So they weren't really rating people that much, and everybody had almost an equal chance. But as time goes on, the big publishers, the big mass media, mainstream legacy media, were able to kind of establish themselves as more important search. And then, of course, all of the search engines now are doing the politically correct stuff where you're looking for all the information, especially if you're researching a particular organization or church or a political group or whatever. You want a range of criticism as well as supportive PR material about that group. But nowadays, you're mostly just going to get the PR material. Criticism, even well-founded, intelligent, non-hostile, but just constructive criticism, isn't going to make it into the search engines. But again, that has nothing to do with eyeballs. It has to do with an algorithmic decision about what is being presented. Okay? And why am I doing this? Because as I've been watching the various little tidbits of the Estuary Conference coming out, the different ones putting out their own videos about the conference, the Estuary, Midwestuary. They're up in Illinois, they're meeting this week. The cult aspect of the movement, and Paul VanderKlay's definitely a ringleader of the cult side. There are a lot of people in it who are just in it because fellowship, warm, fuzzy, faithful fellowship, and all this other good stuff. A few of them know what they're doing, and Paul VanderKlay is really aware, in my personal opinion, that he is LARPing as a Christian pastor. Yeah, I know he's a genuine pastor of a genuine church that he grew up in, so that's not fake. But what he's doing with Estuary is something quite different. It's a political group. It's a cult. And it's pulling people in who are willing to play roles. And people may think he's brilliant. And he's got this thing out where he's talking about how the way search engines work is they watch your eyeballs. Well, you keep going in that direction, we'll be seeing a flat earth video pretty soon. Yeah. Denise Matteau, over and out.